Hello and welcome back to BS Rugby. Major League Rugby kicks off once again this weekend. Season 5 is upon us. Who is going to take the crown after the LA Guiltinis won it last year? Already on the channel yesterday, the Western Conference preview went out with the guys from the Rugby Rant podcast. If you haven't seen it yet, there'll be a link in the description. Do go and check it out. But today we are previewing the Eastern Conference. Who's going to come up on top in the Eastern Conference? Let's hear the thoughts of the guys from the Rugby Rant podcast. Before we get into it, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. It's free to do, helps you keep up to date with everything going on. And I'd love to hear your predictions and your thoughts ahead of Season 5. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, if you'd like to check out the audio version of this video, there's a link down below to the podcast, the Breakdown podcast. You can check it out there. That's enough for me anyway. Let's get straight into it. Let's move on to the Eastern Conference. We'll start with the New England FreeJacks. New head coach in place for this season. Finished 4th in the Eastern Conference, 6th overall. A big New Zealand influence on the squad when I was looking at the roster as well. A lot of New Zealanders have come over, and we've kind of touched on how players are coming over, maybe eligible to play for the Eagles in the future. Josh Larson being one of them. He's now the captain, of course, playing for Canada, though. And players like Dougie Fife, still there, former Edinburgh and Scotland fullback / wing. Scott, where are they at heading into this new season?
I think the Eastern Conference is wide open. They've revamped their roster. They have a lot of firepower on the roster for the game they want to play. Again, I feel it's very similar to Utah. In they want to be physical, and again, they want to play some loose flowing style on the outside. I mean, every rugby team does, but I think they're trying to just run at you and force you to say, "Hey, come and get us." And Rob's going to be mad because I'm going to be talking about the Lindenwood guy before he does. Rob's son. If you watch our show, Rob's son Preston plays for Lindenwood, so Rob likes to talk about the Lindenwood guys. But Cale Hodgson could be another contender for Rookie of the Year, but it's going to be tough for him to jump into that back line in playing time. But I do think he will make the most of everything. He has John Poland at scrum half out of Ireland. It's God, there's so many guys you could talk about on this team. Sean Yankubian at scrum half too. And then I'm also going to take Rob's NOLA Gold, our boy Holden Youngert, who was just on our show, going from NOLA to the FreeJacks at scrum half. So, I mean, you got 3 really good scrum halves on a team. I mean, it's stacked with scrum half. So I highly doubt that if you get an injury in the spine position, you're going to lower the expectation of what the FreeJacks are going to do. For me, it's know thy enemy, right? That's New York's rival. So, it's really, when I'm really looking at it, it's tough to say that they're not going to play us hard, even though I think we're going to beat them 3 times in a row. It's tough to say that, if you actually go to their website, it's telling you where the player is from and then where they can represent. And a lot of those have dual flags, whether it's dual, whatever, New Zealand, US, or Irish, Canadian. So, I mean, they have definitely tailored a team to say, hey, we want to go with guys who are USA eligible.
Predictions then for the FreeJacks, Scott, how are they doing this year?
I think the FreeJacks will it's hard to say anybody in the Eastern Conference is taking a big leap, maybe besides Old Glory, but they're going to play tough. Honestly, I see them in that 3 or 4 slot. They definitely have potential to make the playoffs, as much as it pains me to say it. Rob knows. Everybody who watches the podcast know. Everybody who watches the Rugby New York fan club podcast knows I hate the FreeJacks with all my heart. I respect the hell out of them, but I friggin' hate them. So it pains me to say that they might make the playoffs this year, but I think they might be in that 3 spot.
And for you, Rob, how do you see them going?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think they have a really nice roster. They still have the likes of Poland, Harry Barlow, who really had a nice season last season, Justin Johnson. They still have the services of Bowden Waka and Joe Johnson. They have a nice mix of physicality and a nice mix of pace and deft skills that they can be, right in that number 3, number 4 spot, and they'll be competitive for a playoff spot for sure.
There you go. Next, we're going to move on to your team, Rob, the NOLA Gold. Of course, Kane Thompson in charge now. And can you tell us a little bit about that change in head coach? Because it wasn't that long ago that change was made. So can you tell me a little bit about it and what do you make of that change?
I got to be careful here because I probably know a bit more than I can let on. What I think it comes from this is I think that ownership and management have missed out on the playoffs 4 years straight. And if you've noticed, Nate Osborne was the only original coach that was, with their team as head coach last season. I think ultimately it came down to a decision where the ownership, Tim Falcon, Ryan Fitz, the GM, ultimately said, you know what, we missed out on the playoffs. We want to make the playoffs. What do we need to do? And maybe we ought to look at the very top of the coaching structure. And ultimately, I think they liked what Kane Thompson has done with the forward pack. If you look at the statistics of NOLA Gold last season with regard to the forwards, they were one of the top scrummaging teams. They were, I think, the top line-out team at the line-out. I think they had, they had great forwards that could, obviously with the services of Ken Dolan leading from the front foot, put the ball over the try line. I really think this is my perception. I think their backline struggled. As talented as their backline was with JP Duplessis and Dominguez, et cetera, I think their backline lacked creativity. I love Nate. He's a great man. I consider him a friend, but they lack creativity. And ultimately, if Kane was running the forwards last year and Nate was in charge of the backs, where do we see the breakdown? And I think it was in the backs. And they brought in Collar Spencer initially to do that. And ultimately, they made a decision to part ways with Nate. We hope he lands on his feet. And they brought in then Taylor Howden, by the way, just this week, who's coming back into the No Gold fray. And, of course, Carlos Spencer joins them. He just landed this past week. I think it was on Thursday or Friday. So he is in country. And as a Gold fan, I hope that we see the back line make some improvements. And they're bringing back, they've some guys coming off injury, but my real question for them is who's going to play 10? Is it going to be JP Eloff? Is it going to, come back to Robbie Coleman, who's back from injury? Eloff was injured, by the way. Or is it going to be a guy like Feeks, who also is coming back from injury? So, who's going to play 10? And that's my big question. And that will steer the ship. That will determine their fate.
Yeah, whenever I watched NOLA last season, as you alluded to, it felt like very forward-based, very driving maul was really a big weapon with Cam Dolan leading that, of course. Scott, looking in, without trying to wind up your friend too much, how do you see NOLA going this season? What are their aspirations this season? Is it playoffs and that's it? That's what they got to get after being so close last year?
Well, the last 2 years, we don't count 2020 as a season,
yeah, right.
but 2019 and 2021, at least playoffs. And obviously, I feel like every team in this league is obviously looking for the shield. But I do think Rob is right in the fact that, in my opinion, Coach Osborne, I think, was a little too. For example, I felt Damian Stevens was playing better ball than Holden Younger at certain points, and yet they were starting Holden almost every match. And I felt like, and then all of a sudden you'd see at minute 60 when Holden would come out and Damian would come in, all of a sudden NOLA would have a breath of fresh air. And I felt like, well, why aren't you giving this guy a shot? Because there's an obvious, from a screen, there's an obvious difference in the energy level of these players are playing. So, I think sometimes he was just beholden to some of his stalwart players. And, listen, that in my mind, there's coaches that are great that coach college, and obviously Coach Osborne is one of the best to coach collegiate rugby. And then there's some guys who don't translate to the pros, and you could see that in the NFL with guys like Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh, right? Although Jim Harbaugh is pretty successful. But there's some guys that just have a mindset that fit college and not professional. I think that's where Nate fits. Not saying that's a bad thing or a knock on him. He's still a great friggin' coach. Again, one of the best in collegiate rugby history in the States. I do think Nick Feeks and JP Eloff coming back brings that back line up. I mean, a ridiculous amount. People forget that Nick Feeks was also injured. And the front, I mean, listen, you got Dino Waldron and you got Matt Harmon, again, top 10 props in the United States here. So it's hard to say that, your scrum's not going to be good with those guys propping around everything. And returning, obviously, is the rookie of the year, Andrew Guerra, one of Rob's favorite players. I mean, if you said NOLA, I think the two players' names that would come out would be Cam Dolan and Andrew Guerra, 1 and 2.
Well, Guerra's still going to be injured.
Is he?
Yeah.
That's right. He got hurt. He got hurt during the international.
He got hurt in All Blacks game. Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that. He got hurt in the international window. But they do have a young fly half. Short. Yep, and they do have a young fly half in Carmen Consolino. But again, you'll be fighting with Robbie Coleman and JP Eloff for playing time. I do think this is one of those things where Carm is going to be on the academy team, playing in the academy team. And then every so often, he'll probably be up on the squad, depending on who they're playing or whether there's an injury. So watch out for him when he gets playing time in the MLR, because I think he'll make a difference. I'm not sure he'll actually get it.
And Rob, then, stick your neck on the line. How's it going to go this season for NOLA? Are you going to make the playoffs this year? And who's the player to watch for you guys as well?
Oh, will they make the playoffs? I think it's going to be tough. Rooney obviously has an edge. I think Toronto, which obviously we'll talk about, but them, being back in Canada, they're always a team to watch out for. I think they're going to be competing for that third playoff spot. Who do I watch out for? I think I can't. Look, I could name guys up and down the roster, but truth be told, I'm going to tell you who to watch out for. It's whoever they put in at fly half, whoever makes that fly half spot, because that's going to make that team tick. If they can get guys on the outsides the ball, we're talking about JoJo, for example. If they can get those guys the ball, then that's critical. I wouldn't be surprised if it's JP Eloff. Right, with a year of rest physically under his body, an opportunity to rehab his knee. I think it's a guy that like Eloff that could come in, and he's a game changer. He is so slick with his feet, good boot. And then you got to see then that allows Carl Meyer potentially, if Feek's coming at fullback, he could put Meyer back in and out center, and he's at 6'3" and 230, 240. He and JP. JP Duplessis are a dangerous center combination. So, it's all, can that fly half make that back line tick? And, therefore, Carlos Spencer is the guy to pay attention to.
It's going to be interesting to see how they go. Scott, you going to predict them to make the playoffs, or are you going to?
Yeah, no, I definitely think they're making the playoffs. I think they're up in that 2 or 3 seed. I think the disadvantage that they have this season versus last season is actually a physical one, in that last season we played all throughout June and into July for the playoffs and the championship. And I got to be honest, the weather down in NOLA screws a lot of players up when they're playing at home. So I think they lost that advantage this year, as the season is going to start in at the beginning of March, where it's supposed to, or the beginning of February, when it's supposed to start, versus last year when we had to push everything back due to COVID. So I think that's one big advantage, but I don't think that stops them from playing well. I think they're going to play well this year. I think they're going to do some things, and I think they're going to get the penalties down. Rob knows, especially the first, I want to say 5 matches, they were, the number of penalties they were taking. I mean, they beat Rooney, and I think Rooney was, they were out penalized like something like 25-3 in that match against Rooney, and in which a match they won. You know what I mean? So if they can get that down, they'll be getting those bonus points and doing what they need to do.
And let's move on then to the Old Glory DC, 5th in the Eastern Conference last year, 8th overall. Andrew Douglas is at the helm. Very up and down. They seem to go through phases of winning 2 or 3 matches on the bounce, losing 5 on the bounce, winning 3 on the bounce. Very inconsistent team. Are we going to see more of the same, do you think, Scott, this year?
I think it's going to level out a little more. I think what needs to change is the play from Danny Tusitala. It's funny because the first 5 matches, it was like, Danny Tusitala was going to be the MVP of this league. And then he hit teams in the Eastern Conference that kind of challenged him. And some of those things were, for example, Nate Brakeley in the game against Rooney was coming in and challenging the breakdown late to throw off his rhythm. And you could tell that it actually worked, because passes were then errant, the ball hit the ground, things like that. I have a feeling that's what he worked on this season, because I believe it was NOLA did it first. I'm trying to remember how the schedule last year turned out for them. And then Rooney did the same thing, where you had Kyle Bailey for NOLA coming in late, knowing he wasn't going to actually do anything in the ruck, but just throwing off Danny's timing to get that pass out. And again, it's a little high, it's a little low, it hits the ground, it's a little backwards, and all of a sudden that attacking momentum that OGs have and you've seen how fast they can go forward, is slowed down and stopped, and the defense is coming up to the gain line on them. I think that, in my opinion, they haven't really made a lot of roster changes. It's kind of like almost the same team with a little bit of nips and tucks here or there. Robert Remescue coming from Rooney as a young hooker. I think he's going to get a lot of playing time. He also can play at flanker. They still have guys like, Fandana Schultz and Roberts Tanana and Threaten Palamo. Doug Frazier. I think this is the same team you have last year, but I think if Danny can settle down a bit and not be a little too crazy and get into his own head, you'll see a better team.
Yeah, I remember watching him last year, and he was just a box of tricks, really, but inconsistent as well. Typical Samoan, trying different things all over the place, but not always as consistent, and maybe doing the simple thing rather than trying to do the X Factor move. Rob, for you, how are they going to do this year? They're going to be challenging NOLA near the top, do you think?
I think they're going to be a tough team. Here's where they're going to struggle. Jamie Robertson is out. He went over to France. And I think the fact that he did that very early on, and that announcement was made on the heels of the end of the season, is a pretty good indication of how important he was to that team, right? I mean, that combination of Dusatala and Robertson was pretty critical, right? And without his services, I think they're going to struggle a little bit more to score those critical points. And by the way, speaking of points, it's with the way the table's set up, it's important to score those almighty bonus points, right? And they're there for the taking. You look at the scores; it is a scoring league, right? It isn't a defensive league like we see much of the teams and the structure in the Prem. You're seeing teams score a lot of points, right? 45 points sometimes, and 45 to 31 or something of that nature. And so the points are there to be taken. So you got to get those almighty bonus points. And so without a fly half to direct traffic, it's going to be tough for them, I think, to break free. Now they've got some I think they've got some great players. Jonathan Schultz, Scott mentioned Threaten Palamo, Junior Sao, who came in and was signed. Jake Ilinicki signed over from Seattle. So they try, I think they're trying to shore up some positions, but ultimately, I think they're going to see themselves just outside the playoffs this season at probably 4 or 5.
Yeah, they seem to be just on the cusp, but not quite able to make it. Let's move on then to your team, Scott. Rooney Rugby. I was looking at the roster. Not a bad roster at all, is it? And there's a Fijian winger that I saw, former Fijian Sevens. I'm going to try and pronounce his name, but this could be fun. Kakao Balavu?
This is Scott's favorite name to pronounce. So
one of my favorites.
Get this right. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Apanisa Kakabalavu.
Bingo.
Thank you, Matt McCarthy of the Rugby Wrap Up. He's also the announcer for Rooney matches on TRN. And every time I say something wrong, God knows he corrects me. Thank you, Matt. But yeah,
wrecking ball, isn't he?
And here's the thing: Appy loves to run with the ball. He's a sevens player, but man, he loves to friggin' hit people on defense. I mean, he had some hits legal, but just destroyed guys. It was crazy. I think there's a lot of notable people who are left off the team or not with the team any longer. The biggest one being Ben Foden, essentially hanging up his boots and moving back to the UK. You have guys like Will Leonard who left and were not signed with Rooney, signed with Rugby ATL. Hanku Hermesites, which we talked about previously, going to LA. Who's a big one. James Rochford not being signed back. And then you have guys who moved. Dan Hollinshead going to France, signing with France. Samuel Tawake signing with the Fijian Drua team. And then there's just an article about Nico Jones that came out that says, the Super Rugby almost lost Nico to an MLR team. That MLR team was New York. Pretty much all of the MLR teams have opt-out clauses for players because they don't want to hamstring you to say, hey, we signed you with the MLR, and then all of a sudden a bigger team is going to give you a shot. It's just not fair to the player. So that clause was invoked for him. And that's what happens. That's what happens in a fledgling team. We hope we get to that level of Super Rugby where players will be like, no, I'd rather play in the States because the rugby is at that high level. They had a lot of young players coming in, a lot of young players coming back. Walter Rebolo from Brazil, prop from Brazil. Chance Wengluski coming from Rugby ATL, signing with Rooney. And then you have Nick Civetta, who's actually probably going to miss the first couple matches of the season. Nick Civetta right now playing at Oxford, looking to play in the varsity. He was supposed to do that in 2020. That never occurred. And then he was supposed to do it in 2021. And I believe they got pushed back, and he would have had to miss like the entire MLR season. So he ended up leaving England early to start last year, game 1. This year, I believe he's only going to miss the first 2 matches. But listen, hey, the varsity match is important. Everybody in rugby knows the varsity match. So many notable players. Andrew Duratalu last year playing in it. So, I mean, it's crazy. Ben Bonasso. I mean, I could talk about a million guys. Ben Bonasso making his Eagles debut this year. Argentinian, born in the U.S., plays great. And then all the other people they've added, Nick Mayhew, prop from New Zealand, who's just been all around the Prem. Sam Windsor coming over from Houston. Jack Heighton, the fly half from New Zealand. Quinn Nawadi comes back. Jason Emery's a new guy from New Zealand. There's so many guys I could talk about. And luckily for Rooney, they've all got through with their visas and stuff like that. It's very hit or miss. The only thing that I'm disappointed in is Rooney has a week 1 bye, and then they don't play a home match for the next 4 weeks. And I'm always the type of guy that says they practice in the snow, they practice in the cold. Get NOLA's ass up here and let's play him in friggin' February and let's play some rugby here. I mean, I'm that type of guy. The one Saracens match I got to go to at Allianz a couple years ago, I was so happy. It was believe it or not, the only day it rained in London in my 7-day trip was during the match. Yeah, I know. I couldn't believe it. Everything was beautiful, and then it was rainy and cold, and I loved it. And I love playing in that weather. And I think that just kind of shows you that they're MLR is trying to commercialize to a certain type of fan, which is fine. But I also feel like, hey, we're New York. We play in cold weather. This is what we do.
Yeah, I was looking, as I said, at the roster, and I was so impressed by some of the names. You mentioned Nick Civetta, Chance Owen-Lucy as well, a young prop, a really good scrummaging prop. Dylan Fawcett, of course. Rob, how do you see them getting on, especially with Andy Ellis, former All Black, 37 years old, scrum half? How do you see them getting on this year?
Well, I think they're a team to beat in the East for sure. Much to my chagrin, they have the roster. I think they have a lot of guys that have played together before. Obviously, with Andy Ellis, controlling the back of the rucks and the back of the scrum, they have somebody that can manage that part of the game. And I think they have some young guys that come in that are learning from him. Connor McManus, if I'm not mistaken, is one of those guys. Buckley is another one of those guys, right?
Yep.
So there's some young guys, American kids that are coming up that Andy Ellis is kind of grooming, and I think that's a net positive for Rugby New York, as they're now known, but also a positive for American rugby. So I think they're going to be the team to beat. One thing, Chance Wengalewski, the move to from ATL to New York is a huge net benefit, obviously, to work with his fellow scrummager in the front row. Dylan Fawcett, they have, I think they share a pretty strong connection, and that'll work to the net benefit of Rooney. And you have two guys that, there's one thing about Rugby United. When they got close to the try line, right? When they got that line out, they got that penalty somewhere at midfield, they got the penalty, balls put into the corner. They're going to score. Right, Dylan Fawcett's going to go to the back of that maul, and they're going to score. And I think that ultimately, with all those guys that play for the United States, that's a net benefit for them. They're going to be a very, very tough opponent in the East for sure.
Fascinating. See how they go on. Scotland, you backing your boys to go all the way this year?
Listen, I think they've battled for that number 1 or 2 spot again. I think it comes down to bonus points, and sometimes that's based on luck. Sometimes that's based on the way that referees call the game. Sometimes, which Rob knows is inconsistent in this league, and I think every fan knows it's inconsistencies. But I do think they go number 1 or 2, and I think if they can get there, they can go all the way. Another thing I want to talk about: Luke Hume retiring. Luke Hume, they call him the Bald Eagle, one of the stalwart Eagles on the team, USA Eagles. Him and former Eagle Mike Petrie actually coached the New York Forge, which is the academy side. I just want to bring that up because while we were talking about the draft prior in the West Coast, every team does have an academy team. There's an actual MLR incentive to do so. And these academy teams are coached and run by guys who know how to coach. Mike Petrie being a multiple time, state champion high school coach. They won last year as well. So, I mean, it's not just when we talk about the MLR and USA Rugby and bringing people up, yes, there's the enterprise of the MLR is looking to make money and become a viable product of business, but they do what they can for USA Rugby, and I truly believe the academy system is focusing on USA Rugby.
Rob, predictions for Rooney then? How far are they going to go this year, do you think?
I think just like last year, they're going to be in the Eastern Conference final. So I think they're going to make the playoffs. You know, the only thing that holds me back from saying that they're going to be in that final is the fact that, you know, I'm a NOLA Gold fan.
Hello, folks. Just to stop the recording there, while this was being recorded, we just received the news about Scott Lawrence, which we do talk about, the news regarding him leaving his role as Rugby ATL's head coach with immediate effect. But during the process of editing this, the news has broken about the new coaching setup at Rugby ATL, which has seen that Brett and Blake Bradford have been promoted in their roles at the club. Steve Brett's head coach, and then Blake Bradford as the assistant head coach. That was January the 27th of this year. So do bear that in mind as we go through this part on Rugby ATL. If you are enjoying, folks, make sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like. We're going to try and cover MLR as much as we can this season, and there's plenty of Six Nations content out on the channel as well. Let's get back to the pod. Rugby Atlanta, first of all, first in the Eastern Conference last year, lost in the final to the LA Giltinis. What a season they had. But Scott Lawrence, he's no longer at the helm, left with immediate effect. What's going on at Atlanta, Rob?
Here again, I'm going to have to be careful. Okay. You had a couple things happen. Number one, it was pretty apparent from anybody that was actually in the stadium in Atlanta this summer, especially at the Eastern Conference final when Atlanta won and went on, it was beaten Rugby New York to go into the final, that Marcus Calloway, the owner of Atlanta, was of ill health. On December 29th, Marcus passed away, and he's owed a debt of gratitude for what he's contributed to the league, by the way, and that should be noted. But ultimately, I think it came down to the fact that the team needed a new owner because of Marcus stepping away. He was passionate about rugby. Ultimately, a new owner stepped in. I don't think we can give details, or details have been released about who that owner is. So we'll keep that one close to the vest. But that new owner stepped in. And you know, what's odd for those looking at this situation is two things. Number one, within hours of one another, Scott Lawrence was released. Sorry, let me check that. He stepped down. Okay, so he was no longer associated with the team. And then a player who we do not know the name of was suspended, and there's going to be a league-based investigation. I guess you look at those two things happening within hours of each other, and you have to say somewhere along the line there's something's going on. Those are probably connected. We don't know for sure, but that would be. I mean, your intuition would tell you that it's somehow connected. Now, but we don't know how, we don't know what, we don't know if it's 100%. But the timing of all this, you know, I mean, why would they drop why would a coach step away? 2 weeks into the preseason, if there wasn't something going on there.
It's a difficult situation. There clearly has something going on. We don't want to probe too much because we want to be respectful, of course.
Right.
And it's going to be difficult for the players because they'd obviously have played under him, been very successful last year, had a philosophy on the way they wanted to play.
What does that do to a team with young players? I mean, you also had some notable people, leave. Mark the Cowboy O'Keefe, formerly of Rooney, then to ATL, where he played a big role in their championship push, now on Gilgronis. But it's funny because Will Leonard not being signed by Rugby New York, then signing with Rugby ATL, and Will and Mark O'Keefe are actually like best friends. So it's almost, I would say Will is better on the defensive end than the offensive end. But listen, when you got guys like Jeremy the Missile Agalu and Harley Davidson, which is an awesome name for anybody playing any type of sport, Will Leonard, Ryan Neal, you have a great back line. So I think while you miss the individualness of the Cowboy Mark O'Keefe. They put together a back line that's great, and pretty much, their entire pack is coming back. They have probably the best tandem number 8 you'll ever see in the MLR with Jason Dam, who is up for MVP, and also my boy Ross the Boss Deacon, who would probably start on any other team. And when Jason Dam went down, Ross Deacon came and took over, and they didn't miss a step in that spine position of number 8, and it pushed them into the playoffs and eventually into a final.
Rob, it's really difficult to predict how the season's going to go, but do you think that they will still be able to build upon the success of last year, that the foundations are in place regardless of who steps in?
I think that's going to have a major impact upon how they function this year. What people don't understand about Scott Lawrence is his ability to lead a team. He always has a clear vision. He always is a clear standard of how he wants to operate as a coach, how he wants the players to conduct themselves on and off the pitch, and how he's going, what his expectations are of players. I mean, players come away from that squad and they will say he was a hard man in the sense that he had very high expectations, but he always treated his players with absolute respect.
Do you agree, Scott? Do you think that the turmoil of what's happened over the last few days is going to in the end see them miss out on the playoffs?
I think it goes one of two ways. I think it's going to either they're going to miss out on the playoffs and might be bottom of the barrel, or the players are going to come together and kind of have a fuck you attitude and just put it all out on the field. And sometimes that's what happens. I mean, we haven't seen it in the past with some of the other teams that had this issue, but who knows? They might just want to go out there and say, screw everybody, screw the media, screw the public. We're going to kick some ass, and I could definitely see them doing that.
And with obviously the success of last year, they will want to continue to build, and then they still got quality players in there. And as you said, it could galvanize them and help them to push on. Final team then, not a US-based team. It is the Toronto Arrows, although they were US-based last year, and probably why they had such a difficult year last year, didn't they? Finished bottom of the Eastern Conference, 10th overall, and as I just said, based in the US due to the pandemic. Rob, do you think that was a major factor in their performance last year, that players were so far away from home, from family, for such a long time?
100%. They were away from their family for the better part of 4 months. They couldn't go back and forth. Families couldn't come in and see them. They're living in a hotel, the same hotel for 4 months. They had no home fans. So, when they would have their quote unquote home games in Marietta, Georgia, you really didn't have fan support. And I think that they had some of the best fans in 2019 and 2020, in the short in 2020, that really provided them a boost when they needed. And quite frankly, my predictions, they're going to be one of the top 3 teams in the East. They're going to be tougher. They've picked up a couple guys. They picked up Kyle Bailey from NOLA Gold, signed him. They've got a couple other really solid players that are going to lead them. And they're in a new stadium, Lions Stadium, which I think the fans will gravitate towards because it's a little better. It's a better facility. It's an upgrade from where they were prior in 2019. So ultimately, I think those cultural differences will be huge for them and will give them a lift and definitely help them make the playoffs this year and improve their overall performance.
I think it's going to be fascinating to see how much of a difference that does make. The fact that they will be at home, they'll have a base, they'll be with their families a little bit more comfortable.
I do think this year they are one of the teams to beat. They were almost one of the teams to beat last year. Again, they had a couple slips and this, that, and the other thing, and that was probably due to the situation they were in. I think noticeably you have less South American players on the team this year. I think they got a lot of those South American players because SLAR wasn't happening. And they were going to be based in the United States. And I know we're a little easier on the visa side for South American countries and Canada. So I think they had a big Argentinian contingent and South American contingent. And I think they've moved away from that now that they're back in Canada. But again, I feel like this year in particular, I don't know if Rob agrees with me, we've seen a lot more Rugby Canada players spread down below in the States into other teams. Guys like Andrew Coe leaving Toronto and coming over to New York and things like that. And I think you're seeing the Canadian talent start to spread as they realize they can play in other teams. They don't just have to play for Toronto Arrows to get seen by Rugby Canada. They can play for New York and Seattle and Texas because they will get seen. So while I think it's important that Toronto try and keep their core Canadians, I do feel like they should be courting, more Americans, to be quite honest. And I think you'll see that in the upcoming years.
And let's not forget about Sam Malcolm, too, coming back into the Toronto Arrows fray. Will Kelly, Sam Malcolm. Sam will probably go back to fullback with Will Kelly at fly half. And then, of course, you have Ross Broad at scrum half, and that core of spine positions, I think, is going to really also put them on the front foot for some great attacking rugby this season.
And Scott just quickly touched on having a team potentially on the West Coast. Do you think that's something we could see over the next few years, Rob? Maybe a team in Vancouver, for instance? Do you think there's, the appetite for it? And do you think it is something that we could see over the next few years?
Yes, and I think it's something that the league wants. I think they want a Western Canadian team, and I certainly think Rugby Canada wants it. It's funny, and Scott and I talk about this all the time, along with our co-host Ty Baraga. Fans are always saying, "Well, where's the next team going to be? Is it going to be in Ohio? Is it going to be in in BC? Is it going to be in Miami? Is it going to be in Chicago? Is it going to be in St. Louis?" Well, and why isn't there a team there? Well, it comes down to one thing: finances. They've got to have somebody that can back it, and we know that it's somewhere between 20 and 24 million, over 7 years to have a team. Those are no small potatoes. The league in 5 short years has come a long way. I mean, when you're talking about guys like Tim Falcon that were, at the front foot of this in 2017, 2018, there was not a buy-in at all. They put up their money to support their team. Now the buy-in is estimated between, somewhere between 8 and 10 million just to get in the league. Right. And that takes a serious financial commitment. And it raises the stakes, and it's not, and let's face it, that as an investment is not something that's going to turn a profit in a year or two. Right. So you're talking about a different type of investor, a vanity investor, if you will, somebody that wants to be able to say, I own something. I own a sports franchise and a sports team. And that's a unique type of investor, somebody that's willing to accept, the fact that teams aren't making money quite yet, because of slumping ticket sales on the heels of COVID. And they're willing to forego that because they want to promote rugby and because they want to be able to say, I own this. This is mine. I am helping growing and develop rugby in North America.
Finally, Scott, tell me a little bit about the Rugby podcast. I can't highly recommend it more. It is fantastic, and the reach that you guys have with all the different players. But for those who may not know much about it, here's your chance to plug away.
Sure. So yeah, me, Rob, and our buddy Ty, our hosts on the Rugby Rant podcast show. We talk about North American rugby, which includes USA and Canada. We do talk about South American rugby a little bit when it has to do with MLR and things like that. We talk about rugby sevens. We talk about men's and women's. And we talk about anything rugby in North America we're talking about. You can catch us on all social media at Rugby Rant Pod. Our show drops Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern time on our Facebook page. Go check out our Facebook page, Rugby Rant Podcast. Follow us on social media at Rugby Rant Pod. Check out our Patreon, and you see the lovely mugs of me and the Hammer and Ty Braga. And generally we have, our rants where we're fighting between me, Rob, and a guest about different topics. We have our run, pass, or kick interviews, which is a unique style of interview you won't see anywhere else. And if you don't want to check us out on Facebook, you can go to the Rugby Network app, and we're on there too on Fridays. So, follow us, give us a like, all that fun stuff.
So there we go. That is the preview done and dusted for the Eastern Conference. Shout out to the guys from the Rugby Rant podcast. There'll be a link down below to everything that they do. They're way more knowledgeable than I am. So make sure to check it out as they cover MLR for the season. As well, make sure to leave a like on this video if you have enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. And of course, the Six Nations is also upon us. There'll be previews already on the channel for various nations, and we are building up towards it and covering it here on the channel, so stick around for that. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day, and of course, enjoy the MLR season.